The West End Horror by Nicholas Meyer. This book is read by David Case. The book is preceded by a foreword from the author. One of the interesting consequences of publishing the 7% Solution has been the great number of letters I have received, in my capacity as editor, from all over the world. As I predicted at the time of publication, the manuscript has become the centre of a heated controversy, and people have written to me on all sorts of paper, with varying grammar, spelling, and punctuation, to tell me what they think about the book's authenticity. I even number among my correspondents an 11th grader in Juneau, Alaska, who called me on the phone quite early one morning, apparently supposing Los Angeles time to be an hour later instead of otherwise, to tell me that he thought I was a fraud. A more bizarre result of the book's appearance has been the surfacing of a number of other missing Watsonian manuscripts, to wit, no less than 5, all submitted for my consideration as editor. They arrived from sources as diverse as their astonishing contents: from an airline pilot in Texarkana, Texas, a diplomat in the Argentine, a widow in Racine, Wisconsin, a rabbi in Switzerland, this one written in Italian, and a retired gentleman of undefined occupation in San Clemente, California. The manuscripts were all interesting, and all contained pedigrees explaining their belated appearance and the circumstances under which they were composed. At least 2 of them, while perfectly charming, were obvious forgeries, one a pornographic put-on, a third a thinly disguised political tract, another the ravings of a disordered mind, the 4th attempt to prove Holmes's Jewish ancestry, this was not from the Swiss rabbi, and one— the case you're about to read is taken from a manuscript that belongs to Mrs. C.K. Werner of Racine, Wisconsin. Before it was given to me, I received the following letter from Mrs. Werner, mailed to me, care of my publishers in New York. December the 14th, 1974. Dear Mr. Meyer, I was really interested to read the manuscript you edited called The 7% Solution. My late husband, Carl, was descended from the Vernet family, which, as you probably know, Sherlock Holmes was descended from, too. Émile Jean Horace Vernet, 1789 to 1863, called Horace Vernet, famous French painter and portraitist, was the great-uncle of Sherlock Holmes. I wonder if you would be interested in looking at another long-lost manuscript of Dr. Watson's, only this one was never exactly lost. Carl, my husband, got it from his father, who was willed it, he used to tell us, from Mr. Holmes personally. It is handwritten and a bit difficult to read in spots, mainly because of some water damage suffered to it by Carl's father back in the 30s, when he couldn't afford to fix the roof of his attic. Carl's father, Grandpa Werner, he died in 46, never let any publisher see the manuscript because it's quite clear from the beginning of it that Mr. Holmes didn't want people to read it. But there's a lot of water under the bridge since then, and those people are all dead anyway. I read in the paper last week all about what they just found about Gladstone's personal life, and I guess this can't be any more hurtful than that. Carl is gone since last February, and as you know, the economy is not doing too well. I'm probably going to have to sell the farm and could surely use some cash. If you want to see the papers and you are interested in them, we could come to some understanding about money. I think I'll take your Uncle Henry's advice, though, and try to sell the original copy. I think I read in Time magazine where he got a bundle on it from some Jasper in New Mexico who collects stuff like that. Very truly yours, Marjorie Werner, Mrs. This letter was the first of a great many which passed between Mrs. Werner and myself. On my advice, she consulted her family lawyer, and that individual proved, to my cost, to know his business. Eventually, however, matters were satisfactorily settled, and I flew to Racine to pick up the manuscript after several Xeroxes had been made. It was extremely difficult to read in places, and presented very different problems from its predecessors. The water damage was severe. In places words and even phrases were obliterated and impossible to decipher. I was obliged to consult specialists in this sort of thing, and I give special thanks here to Jim Forrest and the laboratories at UCLA, who worked technical wonders at bringing up missing pieces. There were many occasions, however, when the results were unsuccessful. Here I have been forced to put in the word or phrase that seemed to fit the rest of the paragraph or page. I have done my best, but I am not Watson, and thus the reader may find a jarring note here and there. For this he must blame not the good doctor, but my humble self. I thought of indicating these passages in the book, but then decided such bracketing would be too intrusive. I'm sure the worst offences will be quite obvious anyway, and my clumsy hand will be instantly perceived. Aside from the water damage, the most nettlesome problem was dating the manuscript. Internal evidence makes it quite clear that the West End horror begins March the 1st, 1895. Ascertaining the date of its composition, however, is another matter. It was evident, to me anyhow, that it was composed a lot later than 1895. Not only does Watson refer to intervals of years between efforts on his part to get Holmes's permission for the project, he also points out that among considerations pro-permission were the deaths of many of the principals concerned with the case. Inasmuch as these names are not changed, impossible to disguise, really, as Holmes points out, the dates are fairly easily determined. They hint at a relatively late date of composition, certainly after 1905. The fact, however, that the manuscript is in Watson's own hand indicates with equal clarity that he was not yet crippled by arthritis. Beyond that, it is difficult to say. My own hunch, and it is only a hunch, is that the West End horror was set down sometime after the First World War, and before Holmes's death in 1929. One of the things that makes me pick so late a period is that Watson, as in the 7% solution, but not so much, continues to describe things that obviously aren't there anymore. That Watson never sought to recover the manuscript after Holmes's death suggests to me that his own ailments had begun to overtake him, possibly the onslaught of crippling arthritis, which plagued his last decade. Another argument for the latish dating. It may be noted that Watson's use of Americanisms persists, and this, I feel, deserves comment. Readers sceptical of the authenticity of the 7% solution base part of their argument for forgery on the fact that the book contains these Americanisms, which they deem telltale. But they disregard two very crucial points. In the first place, Americanisms crop up all through Watson's case histories. In the second, there is a very simple reason for this. Between 1883 and 1886, Watson was working as a physician in San Francisco, California, to pay off some of his brother's debts. He married his first wife, Constance Adams, there, as any student of W.S. Baring Gould's excellent biography of Holmes and Watson knows. That was Sherlock Holmes of Baker Street, A Life of the World's First Consulting Detective, by William S. Baring Gould, published by Bramall House, 1962. As Holmes, after living in America for 2 years, remarked to Watson in his last bow, "My well of English seems to be permanently defiled." So much for Americanisms. As for footnotes, I have again attempted to keep them to a minimum, though there are so many facts which check out an argument in favour of the manuscript's authenticity that I felt obliged to include many of them. Finally, a brief comment regarding the authenticity question. We have no way of proving such things. Indeed, healthy skepticism demands that we doubt. To have discovered one missing Watsonian account might seem like a miracle. To have unearthed another smacks suspiciously of coincidence. In self-defense, I point out that I cannot claim to have actually discovered either of these documents, and in the case of the second, as Mrs. Verner points out, it wasn't exactly missing. As regards authenticity, the reader must decide for himself, and I am aware of the controversy, am I ever, that will surround this narrative. I conclude by referring you all to that charming poem of Vincent Starrett, which includes the wonderful work.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?